Hello and welcome back to Football Chronicles. I'm James Cross, and today we're covering something that, in 92 years of FIFA history, has never happened before. A World Cup on the brink, a governing body facing the most serious institutional crisis in the history of the sport, and at the center of it all, a single document that arrived on Gianni Infantino's desk and changed everything. To understand what we're witnessing right now, we need to go back just 48 hours. Because 48 hours ago, FIFA had a problem. It wasn't a small one, but it was the kind of problem the organization had seen before, the kind it knew how to manage. Three major national teams were threatening to boycott the 2026 World Cup. England were furious over new rules governing corner kicks. France had quietly leaked to the press that their players were considering standing completely still for the opening minute of their first match in protest. And Spain, a country that has spent 2 decades perfecting one of the most sophisticated tactical styles in football history, argued that the new regulations would fundamentally destroy everything their game was built on. 3 enormous headaches. 3 powerful federations making noise before the tournament even began. But here's the thing. Infantino didn't panic. And the reason he didn't panic is that he's been in international football long enough to understand one fundamental truth. When a major national team threatens to boycott a tournament, what they're really doing is negotiating. The threat is the instrument. Behind every ultimatum, there is a price. Pay the price, and the threat evaporates. That's how football politics has always worked, from the very beginning, and Infantino knows this game better than almost anyone alive. So the machinery was activated. Urgent meetings with federation representatives, phone calls to national coaches, quiet conversations in the corridors of Nyon, the kind of conversations that resolve disputes far from cameras and microphones. The objective was straightforward: reach an agreement before the first whistle, make a small concession, soften a rule, give each federation just enough of a victory that they could go home and tell their supporters they'd achieved something, without FIFA ever having to publicly admit it had made a mistake. It was a reasonable plan, it was a familiar plan, and by all accounts, it was working. And then the news arrived, and the plan collapsed entirely. Because there are teams in international football whose threats FIFA can manage, negotiate around, and ultimately neutralize without breaking anything fundamental. But there is one team, whose absence at a World Cup doesn't just create a logistical or political problem. It transforms the tournament into something else entirely. Without them, you cannot credibly call it the most important football competition on the planet. Because the most important team on the planet isn't there. That team is Brazil. 5 World Cup titles. The only nation in history to have won the tournament on 3 different continents. In Sweden in 1958, in Chile in 1962, in Japan and South Korea in 2002. The only country to have participated in every single edition of the tournament since its inception in 1930. The nation that gave the world Pelé, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, players who didn't just define football, they transcended it. Brazil is a country where football isn't a sport. It's a national religion, practiced in the streets, on the beaches, in the courtyards of the favelas, where children learn to move a ball before they learn to read. When Brazil says it won't play a World Cup, the tournament doesn't lose a participant. It loses its soul. On the morning in question, Brazil formally joined England, France, and Spain. Not reluctantly, not as a political gesture, but unanimously, with every single player in the squad signing off on the federation's position. No cracks, no dissenting voices, no individual player quietly distancing himself from the group. 26 professional footballers putting their names and their reputations behind a collective decision. And what makes Brazil's intervention qualitatively different from the other 3 nations is this. Brazil didn't join the protest for the same reasons. Brazil had its own grievances, 2 specific, concrete, and deeply documented concerns that had been building inside the Brazilian camp for weeks. The first concerned the match ball. Any football fan over 40 will remember the Jabulani, the official ball of the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. Goalkeepers around the world described it as virtually impossible to read. It moved unpredictably through the air, changing trajectory in ways no goalkeeper could anticipate, turning match after match into something closer to a lottery than a proper football contest. Brazil's formal communication to Infantino alleged that the official ball for the 2026 World Cup exhibited eerily similar aerodynamic characteristics. Long-range shots were generating trajectories that even experienced professional goalkeepers could not reliably track. The direction changes in flight were pronounced enough that efforts seemingly destined for row Z were ending up in the net, and vice versa, with a frequency that pointed not to chance, but to a fundamental design flaw. And Brazil didn't make this allegation casually. They backed it with technical data, with scientific analysis conducted by the medical and physical performance staff of a federation that has the resources to conduct such studies before a major tournament, and chose to deploy those resources as evidence, not just rhetoric. The second grievance was where the situation became truly alarming, because a ball, however problematic, can be changed. It's logistically complicated 2 days before the start of a tournament, years in the making, but it is technically possible. What Brazil raised in its second point is far harder to resolve quickly, and according to those close to the situation, it was the detail that stopped Infantino mid-sentence when he read it. The pitches, the surfaces, the heat. Brazil described the conditions at several 2026 World Cup venues with a level of detail that, by all accounts, made for devastating reading for anyone invested in FIFA's image. Hard, deteriorating surfaces. Grass that wasn't performing at the standard required for elite competition. And when you combine a poor playing surface with the brutal heat that certain American host cities experience at this time of year, temperatures exceeding 35 degrees Celsius in some locations, you create conditions that Brazil's federation argued weren't simply uncomfortable. They were dangerous. Every additional muscular effort a player makes to control the ball on a hard, uneven surface, multiplied across 90 minutes of competition in extreme heat, generates a physiological load and an injury risk that no responsible federation could simply dismiss. Brazil wasn't asking for cosmetic improvements. Brazil was presenting a medical and safety argument backed by the science of its own performance staff. When Infantino finished reading that document, the meeting he was conducting stopped. What had arrived on his desk could not wait while the organization continued managing the problems of the other 3 federations. This required an immediate response of a kind no one in FIFA's history had ever had to formulate before. Consider what Infantino was now facing. 3 major teams threatening to boycott was a serious problem, but a manageable one. FIFA has been handling protests from powerful federations before major tournaments for decades, and there has always, eventually, been a formula. A compromise that leaves everyone just satisfied enough to walk out onto the pitch. But 4 teams with Brazil at the front, backed by the personal signatures of 26 players, that is not a manageable problem in the conventional sense. That is an institutional crisis of the first order. The options on the table were essentially 3. The first was to concede everything, change the ball, address the pitches, review the contested rules, and publish a statement explaining that FIFA had always been open to dialogue. The problem with that approach was the precedent it would set. If you yield completely to the pressure of 4 nations 2 days before a World Cup begins, then every federation in the world begins calculating, ahead of the next tournament, exactly how much pressure is required to get FIFA to change whatever they want changed. The second option was to hold firm, maintain the rules, maintain the ball, maintain the venues, and issue a statement declaring that the tournament would begin as planned, and any team that failed to appear would face disqualification and sanctions. The problem with that option was obvious. A World Cup without Brazil doesn't just lose a team. It loses half its commercial value before a single ball is kicked. And so Infantino chose a third path, one that, in 92 years of FIFA's existence, had never been taken before. He chose to pause the World Cup, not cancel it permanently, pause it. Open an urgent 72-hour negotiation window with all 4 federations involved, with concrete commitments attached to specific outcomes, the ball, the pitches, the disputed rules, and communicate publicly that if those negotiations succeed, the tournament will take place, even if not on its original schedule. The World Cup that was supposed to begin in 2 days may not begin in 2 days. Flights have been booked. Hotels have been paid for. Tickets have been purchased. Millions of supporters around the world had organized their calendars, their holidays, their lives around specific dates, and now those dates are suspended in negotiation. The ripple effects are immense. Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester City, Bayern Munich, PSG, every major club in world football has players in these 4 national squads. Every one of them has preseason scheduled for July, league campaigns beginning in August, Champions League fixtures in September. A delayed World Cup doesn't just disrupt the tournament itself. It sends shockwaves through the entire European calendar in ways that will require weeks of negotiation to resolve at the continental level. But perhaps the most important element of what FIFA is about to release publicly is not the logistical detail, it's the acknowledgement. For the first time in living memory, FIFA is recognizing in its own official communication that 4 participating nations raised legitimate concerns about competition conditions. The organization that has spent decades governing football from Zurich, with, it must be said, considerably more interest in television contracts than in the sport itself, is publicly conceding that the teams it governs had a point. FIFA's legal team has spent years trying to avoid exactly this kind of precedent, but this time there was no alternative. To deny the legitimacy of Brazil's arguments would have been the single greatest communications failure in the organization's history. What's happening this week is not really about a ball with erratic flight patterns, or grass that's too hard, or corner kick timers. Those are the presenting symptoms of something far larger. This is a power struggle, the most consequential one the sport has seen, between the nations that actually play football and the institution that has spent years trying to reshape football into something more palatable to the American market. FIFA has pushed and pushed, introducing rules that restrict tactical time management, that standardize corner routines, that accelerate play in ways that mirror American sports entertainment rather than the game the rest of the world has built its culture around. And Brazil, the most decorated team in the tournament's history, has put a name to what every other federation was feeling but hadn't said with sufficient force. Football is not the NFL. It does not need to become the NFL. What makes football extraordinary? The tactical intelligence embedded in time management, the goalkeeper's deliberate calculation of when to restart play quickly and when to hold the moment, the corner routine crafted over weeks of preparation. These things are not inefficiencies to be engineered out of the game. They are part of it. They always have been. The next 72 hours will be among the most consequential in football history. Either FIFA and the 4 nations find an agreement and the World Cup begins, perhaps slightly delayed, but intact, or the negotiations fail and football confronts something it has never faced before, the postponement of its greatest tournament. Whatever happens, the sport will not emerge from this week unchanged. The precedent has already been set. The balance of power between the governing body and the governed has already shifted. Brazil forced a conversation that FIFA preferred never to have, and the world of football is listening. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Football Chronicles and turn on notifications so you never miss our next football documentary. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching.